I get it. I get it.
I'm here for you, Grace.
Okay.
You are.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna give you another minute to find a partner. Okay. Awesome. Coming back. And then Luke needs a partner, right?
Oh no, I did see
Yeah.
you.
All right, you're with us back. Who's your partner?
Let's go.
Woo! Everyone's roses. Everyone's love.
Actually, I did not see them.
Okay, let me get your attention. So these paragraphs repeat. So if you were on this side of the room, you're going to stay on this side of the room. And if you're on this side, you're staying on this side of the room. We are going to look at paragraphs that you guys have written. These are from this class and this is from the other class. I just randomly pulled some paragraphs that I thought worked pretty well.
Wait, like.
So I don't think any of these paragraphs are absolutely perfect. I kind of tried to find some that were sort of middle of the road in terms of like their structure. So,
I already knew that.
and you know what, in fact, maybe they're a little bit on the higher end of the structure. Anyways, so with your partner now, you're gonna read through the first paragraph. I'm gonna tell you when to switch, and we're gonna do a few of these. You're gonna read through the first paragraph, have your pens and pencils out. You're gonna give at least 2 comments about specific things they do well. So let me tell you some words that are banned. You can't use the word flow.
What do you say?
I don't want you talking about the grammar unless it is like something that they can fix and it's like egregiously bad, which I don't remember any of them being. So what that means is you're not going to say, oh, they use this word and that's a great word because it sounds smart, or it shows that they like know a lot about language. Something sort of like broad about grammar. I don't want you to talk about that either. I don't think that there's any others that usually are such a bad. I guess just for the record, no paint the picture. Ever.
Imagery.
There we go. All right, so I want you to give them 2 specific comments. So is there a specific spot in their paragraph where it has a really nice transition? That could be a substitute for flow. Is there a specific way that they use the example that's really smart? Is the example itself really unique and creative, et cetera, et cetera? I want you to be very specific with what they do well, and you do 2 good comments. So I'll give you a minute to read through it and write 2 good comments together.
I think this is kind of hard to like.
This is tough. It's a deep I don't know what to say, Dr. Words are hard.
I think it is. I like
I like this part.
Look.
It really spoke to me. Ah, come on, doctor. Wow. This is targeting.
And by explaining how her decisions of Dale's
Okay, attention back here. So we talked about how the topic sentence in a paragraph should be a sort of like summation of the argument for the paper or for the paragraph. Or of paragraphs, argument. So on some of your papers, as I've been grading them, I'm like, hey, did you end up somewhere that you weren't expecting in the topic sentence? Or is the topic sentence talk about an example rather than what the paragraph is actually going to be about? Or is the topic sentence just completely vague, so it gives me no sense of what the paragraph will be about? Those are some points of criticism that I had. Read the topic sentence now and give them a comment about whether or not you think it's as great as it could be. If there is something they could fix about their topic sentence, make a little note about what they could fix.
I think we should elaborate.
Oh, I need more time for that. All right, now you and your partner together, your partners for the whole activity, move to, again, if you're on this side, stay on this side, but move to a new paragraph. Yeah, they're not the greatest us for getting into and out of, are they? Look at you guys, so boring. I'm just kidding. Nice, I agree with that.
Third philosophical.
Okay, so for this one, someone already said 2 good things about this paragraph. If you're at a new one, it's a fresh page, but if you're at one that's already been read, someone already said 2 good things. You guys are gonna say 1 more good thing about their paragraph. Write it down on the paper.
One more good thing.
1 more good thing.
What if we're on a new one? Do I have to say 2 again?
Just 1.
Just one. There's something
Stubborn as screw. Say something about that.
That's how it's stagnation. And nothing person is good, and that leads to improvement. Alex, that sounds good.
Oh, talk about the American dream. What? I don't know, but
You face many challenges in order to get to America at 10 miles. You have to do so much. Still stubborn as screw.
I think
He was
this is good.
strengthened by withstanding the adversity.
I think that's really good. Yeah, right.
You're right. Going red.
Okay, so this, no, I can't write like this. I have to write the paper like this.
I hate this.
How do people write like this? Can you write, please? I can't write. I
I
can't
would
write
say
straight
just
over.
mercy off.
Like, you're not supposed to get your good grade.
I don't care. I'm correcting that every time.
Okay. I can't write like that. I can't. That doesn't work.
Fine. What do you want me to say?
So say how like how by like this is a good sentence to use. I don't know. It just is a really good
Good
sentence.
flow. The grammar's right.
What makes it a good?
It's a good like
Intelligent
topic
words.
to use the library. It's a really good spicy topic.
Interesting topic to expound upon.
Okay.
Expound upon, comma, how does
Okay, how many of you guys have one good comment written down on this one? Oh, another minute, okay. Okay, next bit. Let me get your attention. So the second part in our paragraph structure that we talked about is providing enough explanation for your topic sentence. You don't want to just jump right into the example. It's, if you can, it's kind of a sign that your topic sentence is something that everybody just agrees on already. So why make the argument, right? So there should be some, maybe even just one sentence after the topic sentence that kind of expands on that topic sentence and explains to the reader what they are talking about. And I want to know, is it detailed enough? Is it interesting enough? Does it fully explain the topic sentence? If this part is missing, if they're like, just jump right into the example, give them a little note to the side about what they could add. So that means doing some intellectual work for them, but what could they add to make their paragraph more interesting right after their topic sentence? All right, I'll give you a minute to give them a comment on that.
Okay. No, because that's their example.
That's not without time.
Okay, does anyone need more time for that? Okay, switch spots then again. Okay, let me get your attention. So for this one, we are focusing on examples. So I just want you to take write a general comment. And if the paper's getting, crowded, you can do arrows down below. Write a general comment about how effective you think their example is. I mean a specific comment, but I mean it can be about anything about the example. If you think it's good, if you think it's bad, whatever. Give them a comment on the example.
Yeah. Does often to increase that challenge comes maybe it's not
You have to like pull them up.
No, I don't write it fast. I just write it as
All right, if you commented that you think their example is effective, make sure that you say why. If you commented and say not effective in some kind of way, make sure that you say why.
Yeah. It's so true. Let's use it.
Okay, next bit. So first you're commenting on the effectiveness of the example. Now I want you to comment specifically on the amount of detail they provide in the example. I was kind of seeing, as I was reading the paper, some where it was like so much detail that it felt like a tangent, like it was like, oh, this is what they actually care about, but you know, it's in this other paper. Or it was too little detail where it's like, there's so much more interesting stuff that you could do with this example. You could find so many more interesting things to say about how it might fit with your argument. So make a comment on whether you think it's too much or too little, and make sure you say why you think it is that way. Last comment on this one. Comment on if you think that the example fully proves the topic sentence. That's the point of using examples, is to, I could use illustrate too. Prove or illustrate the topic sentence. What do you think? Write it down. All right, 30 more seconds for this one.
Good at giving other people advice for what to write about, but then when I write it, I feel like I have no idea what I'm doing. Yeah, I suppose. Like I'm writing great.
Oh, that blank page gets you. All right, change paragraph.
Aggressive.
What? I don't know that it's all right. Okay, for this one, I want you to do the same thing with the example. It's effective, but just do all three kind of at once. It's effectiveness, if it's too much or too little, and if the example fully proves the topic sentence. So just discuss it, give them as many comments as they need to improve it. You know, the scenario, I told you guys the scenario where the teacher is going to lose their job if they don't, if the AP students do not pass the AP test. No? Oh, okay, then I'll tell you.
Let's not worry about them.
Pretend that you are a teacher, and I don't know what this teacher did, but they are in danger of losing their job The only way they're not gonna lose their job is if all their AP students pass the test. And this is one of your students, and you gotta give them the right amount, the right comments to help them improve their example so that they can pass the test and you can keep your job. And like, and your house, and your kids and all of it. All right, right,
There's a lot of pressure.
It is, it's a lot of pressure. Okay, last bit for this one. So I want you guys to see that, like, you know, there could be multiple examples to prove one point. So I want you to give them an alternative example. Alternative example. So if they are talking about something in pop culture, maybe you could give them an example of something in history. If they're talking about something in history, maybe you could give them a current event, etc. No, but it should be only proving the topic sentence, right? So an example that helps prove their topic sentence. And if their topic sentence is totally missing or confused or something, then maybe this won't work.
Wait, are we trying to, wait, no.
So the next part is about the analysis of their example. We kind of got into this when we were looking at the example itself, but on this one, do you think they do a good job actually explaining why their example proves their topic sentence? Or did you as the reader have to figure out a lot of that for yourself? So do they take you through the example and explain each part and how it works? Or is it like a lot of it is intuitive and you had to figure it out? Okay, give them a comment.
Okay, this next one, and it's the last one. A concluding sentence of a paragraph should be like a little mini mic drop where you're like, see, I proved my point, but it should not go on to talk about the next paragraph yet. So it should still be focused on the one, it should still be focused on the one topic sentence. So you're giving them a comment about whether or not you still think that thesis is focused. Or sorry, the conclusion is focused.
Yeah, but then are they still focused on that topic? Okay, did everyone finish? Okay, when you're done, do me a favor, take off actually no, just fold over the paper's tape so it's not sticky anymore, and then I'll come grab these from you, because I will put them in your box if they are your paragraph. If you want to play next week, thought this would be great. Okay, and then you can split the desk apart to give yourself some more room. Yeah, let's just go back to our seats, our normal seats.
Normal seats. Oh my God.
Casey's food, just near an hour. Like,
I love reading.
me too. It's a vegan place, but and I'm not vegan, but it's weird.
Just like. I'll grab it. I. No, I won't. I'll cry. You'll cry. I don't know what happened. I got kicked out. Zoe, do you need a seat? I can grab you a seat.
It doesn't matter.
Oh, you know what? Fine, fine. I'll be right here.
Okay, we'll add a piece of paper for notes now.
You guys have any? I'm doing my.
Okay, one more time, pull out a piece of paper for notes.
Oh, no.
But like, it was like, I think it's best. Yeah, yeah. That's what it was. I was like, no way that.
Okay. So we're gonna talk about introductions now. We've talked about thesis statements and structure and paragraph structure, and that is the most important part of these essays when it comes to getting a good grade on the AP test. But we don't want to ignore the introductions because this is your chance for a first impression. So this is when, you know, your reader, or in the case of the test, the grader sees you're ready for the first time. And if you can impress them right from the beginning, they're more inclined to kind of give you the benefit of the doubt as you're going. You know, if you impress them right from the beginning, they're like, wow, this is a great writer. And so if you mess up a little bit, they're still going to be thinking about their first impressions. So there's two types of introductions we're going to talk about. One is called a hook and one is called a funnel.
Funnel? I've never heard of a funnel. Stop flexing.
Yeah, you can do it while we go. So the first one is a hook. This one is where, and I'm sure you've been taught both of these before, but this is where you capture your audience's attention. You know, like you're fishing and you hook them and you reel them in. And there's different ways to do this. You can do it with an interesting story. This could be a great place to include your personal experience as a story, because people do like to kind of learn about the writer. It could have a detailed description. So even if you are not talking about your own experience, you could start with an example where that kind of illustrates your point. And if you do that, you want to choose details that are going to be interesting. You could start with a quotation, as long as it's not a cliche quotation. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take, don't start with that one, right?
No,
Or do or do not, there is no try. Those kind of quotes, they probably have the opposite effect of making your reader lose attention rather than gain it. But a great quotation that kind of gets your reader starting to think is a good idea. Kaylee? That could be an interesting way to do it, yeah.
Okay, so by that logic then, is all the AP prompts just hooks because they have the quote? And then they hook you like, I want to write about this. Because they give a quote.
Maybe, yeah, maybe. The quotes, that's a really good comment though, because I am seeing in a lot of the papers, people will write an intro that just repeats the prompt. And that's, because I haven't told you otherwise, but now I am telling you otherwise. Don't repeat the prompt in the intro. Imagine that they have read the prompt, but you are kind of approaching this from a new angle. And so instead of repeating what they just said, you want to add to the conversation. A controversial opinion can be a good one. Oh, Zoe?
So could you say something like, this story relates back to the prompt, or do you How would you know?
So let's say the prompt is about like grit and it has that quotation about grit in it. Just because the prompt used that quotation doesn't mean that you have to in yours, and you can kind of say, okay, I'll accept this about what they say about grit, but I'm going to add to it in this way. Or you could say, well, let me think of a better example. There's that whole thing about living in the moment, that prompt that we got, that was a big block quotation. You don't even have to describe what he said. You could just say, I think it's a great idea to live in the moment and move from there. You know, you're just kind of treating it as a topic that they have. And then these last two are about shocking your audience. So a controversial opinion or a shocking fact. And shocking facts and statistics, they really do, to be effective, they really do need to be kind of unexpected. So consider that when you're.
60 seconds.
All right, so I've got a few examples of first sentences or first couple sentences from famous essays. One is an example of a personal story. When I was 17, an ice storm moved through my hometown in Arkansas and coated the roads and trees with a thin layer of ice. I remember the ice only because later that morning I would receive a phone call that my nephew Keith was in the hospital. And it goes on to talk about healthcare. Women never took a single step forward without being pushed back, first of all, by their opponents. That'd be a good example of starting your essay with a controversial opinion. This is about ultimately getting the right to vote, but I love that she starts with this, like, women are, you know, against the world every step of the way. And then she makes it a little bit more clear, like the nuances of that as she goes, but she does not start with nuance. Anarchist. All right. Rossini, the great opera composer, would recall only two moments of real grief in his life. One when his mother died, and the second time was out on a boat when a chicken stuffed with truffles fell into the water and was lost. It can be a good idea to start with humor sometimes, depending on the prompt. But this catches my attention right away because I expect it to be about grief, and then it becomes an essay about food, and the juxtaposition is funny. Here we go, Mussolini, you know, someone we should all admire and copy. You think to sign my death warrant, but you are mistaken. Today you hate me because in your heart of hearts, you still love me. And then he goes on to talk about everything good he did for the country. All right, and then there's a lot more. Okay, so
That's a big hook. Oh my gosh. It's like a whale.
So this one, if you took my class last year, I wrote this one in front of you. So I was just pulling this from last year, just so you know. It was about that dehumanization topic that we had when we were talking about World War II. If you didn't have me last year, no big deal. But I wanted to show you an example of how you could use a hook even when it's not a personal story, how you could use detailed description to kind of get into the essay. So it says, in 2020, the world was introduced to the COVID-19 virus. In response to this global pandemic, many countries, including America, issued emergency stay-at-home orders. Office workers and students used the internet to work remotely. Essential workers were outfitted in medical protective gear, and jobs in the entertainment field were put on furlough and collective unemployment. Though the economy suffered, the government felt that it was prudent to keep everyone in its citizenry healthy and safe. Everyone, that is, except for America's prisoners. Prisoners, already forced into tight living spaces, were given no personal protective equipment. They did not have access to the kind of testing that essential workers had, and the overcrowding of prisons meant that a far larger percentage of prisoners than average citizens fell sick and eventually died from COVID-19. Though the death of any human being should be considered tragic, many Americans did not think at all about the conditions in prisons, and when they did, they dismissed prisoners as lesser members of society and thus not worth pity and attention. The treatment of prisoners during the COVID-19 pandemic highlighted an issue with American prisons that has always existed: the dehumanization of the prisoner. Through dehumanization tactics, America has been able to relegate a large portion of its citizenry to non-human status. But if the goal of imprisonment is eventually rehabilitation, then America needs to reform its prison system in order to treat prisoners as the valuable human beings that they are. Okay, it's long. I wouldn't use this long of an intro unless I were writing maybe a 5 to 6 page essay rather than, you know, the 2 to 3 page essays that you guys write. But I did have this as an example of how I used an example for how to get in to my thesis, because my thesis is not going to be about COVID-19. That's just an illustrative example of the dehumanization idea. Does that make sense? Okay, let's watch one now.
Let's watch one.
What? Alistair? Alistair? I guess I'll fight you like the old man. Why? No question.
All right. TED Talks are very good at this style of intro, partly because they're aiming to be like to go viral, right? And so you see the way that they're trying to reel people in right from the beginning. So here's an example of a hook intro.
When I was 7 years old and my sister was just 5 years old, we were playing on top of a bunk bed. I was 2 years older than my sister at the time. I mean, I'm 2 years older than her now, but at the time that meant she had to do everything that I wanted to do, and I wanted to play war. So we were up on top of our bunk beds, and on one side of the bunk bed, I had put out all my G.I. Joe soldiers and weaponry, and on the other side were all my sister's Milos and ponies and ready for a cavalry charge. There are differing accounts of what actually happened that afternoon, but since my sister is not here with us today, let me tell you the true story, which is my sister is a little bit on the clumsy side. Somehow, without any help or push from her older brother at all, suddenly Amy disappeared off the top of the bunk bed and landed with a crash on the floor. And I nervously peered over
Everybody.
Who is this for?
Isn't it for a specific
We're going around. What are we seeing?
Oh, sugar, bum, 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 bum. Oh, honey, honey, bum, 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 bum. You are my candy girl, and you got me wanting you. Oh, honey, bum, 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 bum. Oh, sugar, sugar, bum, 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 bum. You are my candy girl, and you got me wanting you.
You're a nerd.
We're off to Mr. Larson.
Mr. Larson.
Yeah, Garrett.
I'm his brother.
Yes, I'm Eric's brother, guys.
So he's allowed to call you a nerd?
What?
So he's allowed to call you a nerd?
Yeah, he calls me that all the time.
Oh, okay. Who was that from? Austin, who was that from?
I'm in chamber, and those are all the chamber boys, and so,
Are they from them?
so it was from all of them.
Nice. All right, back to this. Fun's over.
with us today. Let me tell you the true story, which is my sister is a little bit on the clumsy side. And somehow, without any help or push from her older brother at all, suddenly Amy disappeared off the top of the bunk bed and landed with this crash on the floor. And I nervously peered over the side of the bed to see what had befallen my fallen sister and saw that she had landed painfully on her hands and knees on all fours on the ground. I was nervous because my parents had charged me with making sure that my sister and I played as safely and as quietly as possible. And seeing as how I had accidentally broken Amy's arm just 1 week before, heroically pushing her out of the way of an oncoming imaginary sniper bullet. For which I have yet to be thanked. I was trying as hard as I could. She didn't even see it coming. I was trying as hard as I could to be on my best behavior, and I saw my sister's faces wail of pain and suffering and surprise, threatening to erupt from her mouth and threatening to wake my parents from the long winter's nap for which they had settled. So I did the only thing my little frantic 7-year-old brain could think to do to avert this tragedy. If you have children, you've seen this hundreds of times before. I said, Amy, wait, don't cry, don't cry. Did you see how you landed? No human lands on all fours like that. Amy, I think this means you're a unicorn. Now that was cheating, because there's nothing in the world my sister would want more than not to be Amy, the her 5-year-old little sister, but Amy, the special unicorn. Of course, this was an option that was open to her brain at no point in the past. And you could see on my poor, manipulated sister's face conflict, as her little brain attempted to devote resources to feeling the pain, the suffering, surprise she just experienced, or contemplating her newfound identity as a unicorn. And the latter won out. Instead of crying, instead of ceasing our play, instead of waking my parents with all the negative consequences that would have ensued for me, instead, a smile spread across her face, and she scrambled right back up onto the bunk bed with all the grace of a baby unicorn. With one broken leg. What we stumbled across at this tender age of just 5 and 7, we had no idea at the time, was something that was going to be at the vanguard of a scientific revolution occurring 2 decades later in the way that we look at the human brain. What we had stumbled across is something called positive psychology, which is the reason that I'm here today and the reason that I wake up every morning. When I first started talking about this research outside of academia.
Okay, so then he starts going into his research about how positive psychology can change your thinking. You can find it. You can find it later. All right, let's watch one more intro. So this one's more hypothetical. It doesn't start with and again, you can always lie about your experiences. No one's gonna know. But it doesn't start with an actual experience. It starts with a little story, and this could work too. Has anybody heard this one before? This is water. Oh, you'll like this one.
There are these 2 young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the 2 young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, "What the hell is water?" The point of the fish story is merely that the most obvious, important realities are often the ones that are hardest to see and talk about. Stated as an English sentence, of course, this is just a banal platitude. But the fact is that in the day-to-day trenches of adult existence, banal platitudes can have a life or death importance. The plain fact is that you graduating seniors do not yet have any clue what day in, day out really means. There happen to be whole, large parts of adult American life that nobody talks about in commencement. One such part involves boredom, routine, and petty frustration. The parents and older folks here will know all too well what I'm talking about. By way of example, let's say it's an average adult day. You get up in the morning, go to your challenging white-collar college graduate job, and you work hard for 8 or 10 hours, and at the end of the day, you're tired and somewhat stressed, and all you want is to go home and have a good supper and maybe unwind for an hour and then hit the sack early, because of course you have to get up the next day and do it all again. And you remember there's no food at home. You haven't had time to shop this week because of your challenging job. And so now after work, you have to get in your car and drive to the supermarket. It's the end of a work day, and the traffic is apt to be very bad. So getting to the store takes way longer than it should. And when you finally get there, the supermarket is very crowded, because of course it's the time of day when all the other people with jobs also try to squeeze in some grocery shopping. But you can't just get in and quickly out. You have to wander all over the huge, overlit store's confusing aisles to find the stuff you want. And you have to maneuver your junky cart through all these other tired, hurried people with carts, et cetera, cutting stuff out to this long ceremony. And eventually, you get all your supper supplies, except now it turns out there aren't enough checkout lanes open, even though it's the end of the day rush. So the checkout line is incredibly long, which is stupid and infuriating, but you can't take your frustration out on the frantic lady working the register, who is overworked at a job whose daily tedium and meaninglessness surpasses the imagination of any of us here at Prestigious College. But anyway, you finally get to the checkout line's front, you pay for your food, and get told to have a nice day in a voice that is the absolute voice of death. And then you have to take your creepy, flimsy plastic bags of groceries in your cart with the one crazy wheel that pulls maddeningly to the left, all the way out to the crowded, bumpy, littery parking lot. And then you have to drive all the way home through slow, heavy, SUV-intensive rush hour traffic, et cetera, et cetera. Everyone here has done this, of course, but it hasn't yet been part of your graduate's actual life routine, day after week, after month, after year, but it will be. And many more dreary, annoying, seemingly meaningless routines besides. But that is not the point. The point is that petty, frustrating crap like this is exactly where the work of choosing is going to come in.
That's his thesis. That's his intro. Did you notice how detailed it was? I'm gonna let this play though, because this speech is just so good. Any objections? Okay, it's really great. It changed my thinking for the better, so I'm hoping everybody likes it.
Because the traffic jams and crowded aisles and long checkout lines give me time to think. And if I don't make a conscious decision about how to think and what to pay attention to, I'm going to be pissed and miserable every time I have to shop. Because my natural default setting is the certainty that situations like this are really all about me, about my hungriness and my fatigue and my desire to just get home. And it's going to seem for all the world like everybody else is just in my way. And who are all these people in my way? And look at how repulsive most of them are, and how stupid and cow-like and dead-eyed and non-human they seem in the checkout line, or at how annoying and rude it is that people are talking loudly on cell phones in the middle of the line. And look at how deeply, personally unfair this is. If I choose to think this way in the store and on the freeway, fine. Lots of us do. Except thinking this way tends to be so easy and automatic that it doesn't have to be a choice. It is my natural default setting. The automatic way that I experience the boring, frustrating, crowded parts of adult life when I'm operating on the automatic, unconscious belief that I am the center of the world and that my immediate needs and feelings are what should determine the world's priorities. The thing is that, of course, there are totally different ways to think about these kinds of situations. In this traffic, all these vehicles stop and idling in my way. It's not impossible that some of these people in SUVs have been in horrible auto accidents in the past and now find driving so terrifying that their therapist has all but ordered them to get a huge, heavy SUV so they can feel safe enough to drive. Or I can choose to force myself to consider the likelihood that everyone else in the supermarket's checkout line is just as bored and frustrated as I am. And that some of these people probably have much harder, more tedious, painful lives than I do. Again, please don't think I'm giving you moral advice, or that I'm saying you're supposed to think this way, or that anyone expects you to just automatically do it, because it's hard. It takes will and effort. And if you're like me, some days you won't be able to do it, and you just flat out won't want to. But most days, if you're aware enough to give yourself a choice, you can choose to look differently at this fat, dead-eyed, over-made-up lady who just screamed at her kid in the checkout line. Maybe she's not easily like this. Maybe she's been up 2 straight nights holding the hand of her husband who's dying of bone cancer. Or maybe this very lady is the low-wage clerk at the motor vehicles department who just yesterday helped her spouse resolve a horrific, infuriating red tape problem through some small act of bureaucratic kindness. Of course, none of this is likely, but it's also not impossible. It just depends what you want to consider. If you're automatically sure that you know what reality is and who and what is really important, you want to operate under default setting, then you, like me, probably won't consider possibilities that aren't annoying and miserable. But if you really learn how to think, how to pay attention, then you will know you have other options. It will actually be within your power to experience a crowded, hot, slow, consumer hell type situation as not only meaningful, but sacred, on fire with the same force that lit the stars. Love, fellowship, the mystical oneness of all things in general. Not that that mystical stuff's necessarily true. The only thing that's capital T true is that you get to decide how you're going to try to see it. This, I submit, is the freedom of real education, of learning how to be well-adjusted. You get to consciously decide what has meaning and what doesn't. That is real freedom. That is being educated and understanding how to think. The alternative is unconsciousness, the default setting, the rat race, the constant gnawing sense of having had and lost some infinite thing. I know that this stuff probably doesn't sound fun and breezy or grandly inspirational the way a commencement speech is supposed to sound. What it is, as far as I can see, is the capital T truth with a whole lot of rhetorical niceties stripped away. You are, of course, free to think of it whatever you wish. But please don't just dismiss it as some finger-wagging Dr. Lore's sermon. None of this stuff is really about morality or religion or dogma or big fancy questions of life after death. The capital T truth is about life before death. It is about the real value of a real education, which has almost nothing to do with knowledge and everything to do with simple awareness. Awareness of what is so real and essential, so hidden in plain sight all around us all the time, that we have to keep reminding ourselves over and over, this is water, this is water.
So good. So it also, what I like about that too, is that he brings back the initial anecdote. So it comes back in the conclusion, which gives it like this nice roundedness. But he doesn't do it in the way that it's boring, where you just repeat your thesis in the conclusion. He has this like clever way of bringing it back. So that's that style of thesis, of intro. Okay. Oh, sorry, I gotta Zoom share. There we go. Okay, the other style, and this one might be great if you're in a time crunch, like you will be on the test. This is a really good style of intro to use if you just need to get an intro done. So with this, you start with something broad and you narrow it down as you go until you get to your thesis statement, which should be the most narrow sentence of your paper, where you're just where you are expressing what your argument is, right? So start with something broad, but not too broad. One thing I'm noticing in our papers is that there's a lot of start with like in the history of the world, in the universe, on planet Earth, like really, really wide. Maybe start one sentence below that, or even two sentences below that, where you're a little bit more specific to introduce your topic. Your topic should still be somewhere in the intro. And then as you get more and more narrow, we realize more about what your opinion is about that topic. But, you know, it looks like funnel. That's why I keep doing this. It's like broad to more narrow funnel. Okay. So here's an example of this kind. I think I just pulled this. Oh yeah, this is from another class. So someone did have a good, it's not perfect, but they had a good example of this funnel style. So it says, when people have had a long day, they usually do whatever they can to relax, including watching movies. They could watch a cute animated movie, an intense action-packed thrill, a hilarious rom-com, or even a horror movie. I think that's supposed to say thriller. One of the most popular genres right now is the serial killer documentary. There have been countless movies based on different serial killers from the past. Serial killer is defined as someone who commits several murders without apparent motive and typically follows a common pattern. People have taken these serial killers and turned them into something they aren't. One of the most popular serial killers is a man named Ted Bundy. If you don't stay up to date with true crime, you still know the name. Even if you don't, you know the name Ted Bundy. While Ted Bundy was notorious for his many murders, good looks, and charismatic personality, he's extremely overrated because in reality, he lacked cleverness and creativity. The thesis is like slightly creepy, but I know what they're going for. It's a different class. All right, so what you notice here is it starts broad. It doesn't say something like, oh, in the history of the world, there have always been serial killers or anything like that. It starts with this idea of what we do for entertainment. And that kind of sticks around throughout, even at the end when we're thinking about overrated, but it just gets more and more narrow about what exactly is overrated. So that's a funnel style. Here are some things to avoid in your intro, and this is in both styles. Avoid cliches completely. no actions speak louder than words, the grass is always greener on the other side, the roads are paved with wishes, or whatever, any of those cliches. It's especially bad to have that as your first sentence, because it's like, oh, if they're starting with a cliche, then I'm guessing their whole paper is going to be a cliche. Again, unless, like Kaylee brought up, like, unless you're like using it as a way of like getting at something interesting about some unexpected truth, it can be okay. 2, a definition of a well-known word. This happens a lot in the papers I see, where it's like happiness means this, and then you just like look it up in the dictionary. What I liked about the other intro I showed you is that it did include a definition of serial killers, but I didn't necessarily think that was as well known as some other words I see started with.
Serial killer.
Could be, except for a
You have to
different spelling,
define
right?
it.
Yeah. The third one, announcement of how you chose your topic or how the paper will be structured. I don't often see this in AP, but just in case, you don't want to say like, I first became interested in this topic in this way, or when my teacher first gave me this topic, I didn't like it, but now I do. Like, we don't need it to be we want it to be able to work in all sorts of settings, not just a classroom. So you want to avoid that. I did say statements that are too broad, because those are too boring. In the history of the world, there's always been conflict. Like, yes, of course, we can cut that down. One way to check is to just read through your intro again and see if it would make sense to just delete the first sentence, and if the second sentence would be a better place to start. Yeah. Oh, is that true? Yeah. Is this like all of them? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I guess it's true for anything though, any kind of writing and speech. Yeah. And then the last one I have capitalized with an exclamation point, because it means so much to me, which is that do not include questions in formal writing. One, don't include it for the first sentence. The first sentence of your paper should not be a question. That can be a common way of teaching like little kids, or even in junior high sometimes, about how to get into a paper. It's not terrible for them, but by this point, we don't want to start with it just because it's been overdone. So that's why you don't start with a question. But you also, it's just a good idea not to include questions in formal writing, because, and I don't mean this in a rude way, but you haven't mastered formal writing yet, and questions can be really tricky to use correctly in your writing. So what I see happening a lot is that people will use questions in order to transition, because it's harder to write a statement than it is a question, or it's harder to write a question than it is a transition. So I always keep saying, and to the side, no questions in formal writing. That's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
Well, then how about like, when we do rhetorical analysis, we're looking at people using rhetorical questions and hypophora and stuff.
Yeah. And I think that's because they can do it well.
So we're just bad.
Yeah, sorry. It's a matter of, and I don't always say that. If you notice, like sometimes you'll have a question and I'll just leave it, or usually if it's a good one, I'll write to the side like, hey, this is a good example of how to use a question. But it's just more common to have the bad ones. So that's why I'm being lazy about making this rule. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to give you a couple new prompts now for your arguments. All right, I'm just going to pass them back in big stacks. Take one and then leave the extras for me on the blank desk. Okay, take them, pass them to the other column of students. Did you guys get one?
We did.
Okay. Claire, did you get one? All right, let's look at these two prompts. So this went with an article I was gonna have us read, but I don't have time for it. So it's kind of coming out of nowhere, but these are still prompts from past tests, so it'll be useful. It says, the first Buy Nothing Day, a day on which people are urged to purchase no goods, was organized in Canada in 1992 as a way to increase awareness of excessive consumerism. A Buy Nothing Day has been held yearly since then in many nations. An online article, Buy Nothing Day 2006 press release, urged worldwide acceptance of taking a 24-hour consumer detox as part of the 14th annual Buy Nothing Day in order to expose the environmental and ethical consequences of overconsumption. Consider the implications of a day on which no goods are purchased. Write an essay that argues your position on the establishment of an annual Buy Nothing Day. So that's both of these are like not so philosophical prompts. It's like actually, a proposal. What do you think of this proposal? Okay, the second one down below, I'll put a little 2 by it. In The Singer Solution to World Poverty, an article that appeared in the New York Times magazine, Peter Singer, a professor of bioethics, calls attention to the urgent need for food and medicine in many parts of the world. The formula is simple. Whatever money you're spending on luxuries, not necessities, should be given away. Write an essay that argues your position on Singer's argument that prosperous people should donate to overseas aid organizations such as UNICEF or Oxfam America, all money not needed for the basic requirements of life. Okay, that one can be tricky. So I've had students in the past that have written about that essay and they say, no, that's communism. The government can't take away the money of people who earn more, right? But the question that is put forth isn't about the government taking away or reallocating funds. It is about the prosperous people donating it themselves. That word donate is really important in that prompt. So you have to talk about whether or not it's more of an ethical question than it is a proposal. It's saying, is it ethically correct for them to donate all their money or not? Does that make sense? The distinction? Okay. So it's not about anybody forcing them, but it is kind of like about the ethics forcing them, if that makes sense. Okay, those are the two prompts. I want you, did I do 3? Oh, let's do 3. Author and lecturer Alfie Kohn contends that competition by its very nature is always unhealthy. Read the following excerpt from Kohn's essay, Why Competition? The cost of any kind of competition in human terms is incalculable. When my success depends on other people's failure, the prospect of a real human community are considerably diminished. Moreover, when my success depends on my being better than, I am caught on a treadmill, destined never to enjoy real satisfaction. Someone is always one step higher, and even the summit is a precarious position in light of the hordes waiting to occupy it in my stead. I am thus perpetually insecure and, as psychologist Rollo May points out, perpetually anxious. Write an essay that argues your position on Kohn's claim about the nature of competition. So it's all about acquiring and economic competition was the reason that I chose those 3 to go together, but you could write about any of those. So we've got an essay coming up. We always have an essay coming up.
When in doubt, there's an essay coming up.
So on Thursday, you're writing another one of these little argument essays. What I am hoping, yeah, it's due on Thursday. What I'm hoping is at this point, these are getting faster for you, that it's not taking hours and hours for you to plan these, unless you're going overboard, but that you're able to do these quicker. This is part of the reason that we do all the repetition, is so that when it comes to doing a timed essay, which we are mentally prepared doing in class next time. I know.
Are you serious?
Yeah. When it comes to doing a timed essay, you'll be able to do it.
Wait, what if
Yes, I did it all.
So
Why?
It's rough, it's rough.
I'm gonna
isn't
be-
it?
all right, grab a piece of white line paper.
I'm gonna be. I told you that.
We're gonna do the intro now. Everyone's grabbing a lined piece of paper.
Wait, is it like all of the different prompts that we flipped over?
We are doing it right now. Take out, grab a lined piece of paper. We're just writing the intro. No, for this one. Okay, so here are all the choices that you have. We have done a prompt on ownership and artifice. You did one of those and you didn't do the other. So the one that you didn't do is still open. We did one on hard work last time. You had a thesis on hard work. We did one on grit and one on living in the moment. We did one on overrated, something that's overrated. And then we have these three. So at this point, you've got a lot of options for what you would want to write about. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to decide which one you're going to write about for this next argument essay, the one that you're doing at home.
I don't really. What was the one that we did in class when we wrote our thesis for in class? Is that-
I think we've done that for almost all of
I mean, the last one that we did.
hard work. Yeah.
Yes.
I need an extra.
An extra what?
What was the one that we did last?
Oh.
Hard work. Yeah,
Was Luke taking the bullet? Oh, okay. Okay, you got it in mind?
What was the one that we did last time?
The one about hard work?
Was that the overrated? No, that was the time before.
2 times before was the
Can we
overrated.
do the overrated?
Yes.
I'm gonna write about it. That's all that's in my mind. That's a hot take. I love overrated.
Okay. Ah, I gave you too long. Okay, so I'm gonna time it. You've already probably written the thesis statement for this essay because we've been doing so many thesis statements in class. You probably have it somewhere. So I'm going to give you now 5 minutes. We're going to do a super fast timed intro because this is about the amount of time you would ever want to spend on an intro. Sometimes I'm afraid I show you the great hook intros and then I'm like, uh-oh, they're going to spend 40 minutes thinking of the best hook intro, right? But in the real, in our circumstance, you probably shouldn't spend more than 5 minutes on an intro. They go fast. So everybody got a pen or pencil out? You got your lined paper? Yes. Okay. All right. Ready? This will take us right up to the bell. Gonna try and finish the intro. Ready? Go.